On today's Hiwatt Soundbite, we're bringing our drum tracks to life by throwing down some delay. Well, I am so excited to share some ideas today on drum delays and just how huge an impact we can have as producers and engineers by throwing down some delays on those performances. I mean, whether we're talking about a real acoustic drum kit that was performed in a room or a bunch of programmed electronic drums, the addition of some very simple delays can be an absolute game changer to how those drums are perceived to the listener. So for today's session, I've got 3 examples of some of the processes I love to get up to in throwing down delays. Well, in this first example, I pulled some live drums off a mix, and I noticed something going on here that I get up to often. You know, some of you can probably relate to this, but while I'm mixing, I often try and introduce something to that second or third verse that didn't happen in the first verse. And, you know, many times we're doing that through instrumentation and adding new parts, right? Well, in a lot of projects, the instrumentation might not be there. The original arrangement may not have had any instrumentation that separated that third verse from the second or first verse. In that situation, I often throw down a bunch of delays on drums to sort of change the feel of any given part. In this example, here's how the first verse drums were mixed. Really simple drum beat, right? Well, I can see that in the third verse, I introduced a very simple mono dotted eighth note delay. Here's what that sounds like. With a bit of regen on it, right? Yeah, there's something about that dotted eighth note and the syncopation that it can bring to any given track that can just be sort of magical. Well, something else I noticed on this third verse is I've automated that send to the delay to mute during the fills. In my experience, the thing that makes drum fills played by a human being so cool is the fact that they're not perfect, right? There's feel and there's groove in it. If you allow those drum fills to feed into that delay, you're gonna end up with a bunch of flams and craziness. In this example, I'm gonna let the drum fill feed the delay. Oh yeah, sure enough, there's a bunch of flamming going on, right? So very often what I'll do in a situation like this is I'll just program a mute on that send just for the fill. So very simple delay, but really effective in how that drum performance comes across, right? That whole syncopation vibe that it adds can really bring a nice flavor if you're trying to introduce something to that second or third verse that didn't exist in the first. Well, another delay effect that I absolutely love to use, particularly on a live performance like this, is a really wide ping-pong stereo delay with no repeats on it. Okay, I'm talking about 0 feedback, right? And it looks like on this particular stereo delay, I've got a dotted eighth note on one side and an eighth note on the other. Creates a really cool effect on the drums. Check it. You know, it's not uncommon for me when I'm setting up my mixes to have an additional auxiliary on the way to that effect. I've talked about this in past sessions that instead of just feeding directly off the channel of, say, bus 11 and 12 and going directly into that reverb unit, I will very often create another auxiliary layer so that I can send out of 11 and 12, go into that auxiliary, and then have that auxiliary feed the reverb or the delay or whatever it is. The beautiful thing about setting up that extra auxiliary on the send is that, of course, now you can start adding plugins before that effect, before that reverb or delay. In this particular case, as I do with most live drum kits, I gate the send that's going to that delay for obvious reasons. I mean, you know, if you just start sending a whole live drum kit into a delay, it's going to get pretty washy pretty fast, right? Because you've got cymbals, hi-hats, all this leakage that's feeding into that delay. Well, you can absolutely solve that very simply by creating that second bus that allows you to put a gate before the send to that delay. This is absolutely critical. And in this particular case, I've also added modulation into that delay. For the moment, let me go ahead and bypass these two effects I'm talking about and just feed this drum kit into the delay straight. It's kind of messy, right? Well, as soon as I insert that gate, notice how I'm just getting the snare opening on that gate, right? Well, now it gets really fun because when you open up that gate and you start controlling the threshold of where that gate triggers, oh man, this can be a lot of fun. Check it. Yeah, really love putting that gate in line and adding modulation on that send, right? Because then the repeats that are coming back are always changing a little bit in character, right? The tonal quality is constantly kind of evolving over time. So for this next example, totally different vibe. Here's a programmed electronic vibe. Oh yeah, really good example where I'm really digging the groove and the vibe of a track, and I'm looking to delays as more of kind of a special effect thing. In this particular case, I'm using my old hardware Lexicon Pcm 42. Talked about it in past sessions. It's probably my favorite delay of all time. I just found a really tight 16th note. And again, putting a little bit of modulation on the return of this delay. It's not to the send, it's actually on the return. So this is something I often get up to, is just sort of really more subtle delay effects, but really, really kind of cool and very dynamic. Okay, so here we go. Let's track this. Just like noodling around on a guitar or something, when I'm throwing down delays like I just did, 90% of that I'm probably not going to use, but there's going to be some magic moment that happens where I absolutely just love it. I strongly encourage you to get into this sort of dynamic delays. These very specific and special delays, they can be really, really cool, subtle effects in your mix that end up making a really big difference in the end. So another example of programmed drums, check it. Yeah, super tight and punchy programming, but also really clean. And a lot of times, I'll want to get into a drum sound like this and sort of mess it up a little bit. But if it's a really big loop that's providing a foundation of my mix, I'm not going to want to go in and mess with that direct sound much, right? I want that foundation to keep pounding through. Well, this is a method I often use when I'm trying to bring a bit of kind of noise character or grottiness into that drum sound. I'll create 2 mono-channel delays like I've got set up right here, and I'll bus those to a final destination stereo track. The beauty of this is that, by using 2 totally different delay lines and plugins, the left and right channels of this final destination track are going to sound very, very different just because of the nature of these 2 delays, right? They're both modeled after kind of old school tape delays, but they both sound very, very different. When I've got 2 plugins open on the same window like I've got right now, and I need to do adjustments to both of them in real time, more often than not, I'll just set up and sort of map some of those parameters on one of those devices to a piece of hardware like I've done today. And I'll just go ahead and mouse the controls on the other one. So just allows me to have independent control of these 2 feedback knobs simultaneously. I love it. So let's jam some dynamic delays. So I encourage you to get up to these practices, start throwing down some really fun and dynamic delay effects to your drum tracks and listen to what happens to your productions.